and welcome to the first Wednesday class that shall not be named of the Gregorian year 2026. We're here today with awesome people as we start. Welcome to Michael and Eva and Arlene and Ron and Jeff and Arnold, who are not pictured, as we're going to celebrate the new year. Hope everybody had a good one. Did you guys all have a good new year? All right, I'll take that as a definite maybe. So what we're going to do today is I'm teaching later today, so I thought it'd be a good time to practice what I'm teaching in a little bit. Because the Learning Center in Savannah is doing, I think it's a 5-part series on the Holocaust, which we really appreciate. So we've all, of course, done a lot with the Holocaust. However, I've been asked to do the first session. The first session is what was life like in Europe before the Holocaust, which is an entirely different take on what's going on. We talk about the Holocaust a lot, but what was life like beforehand, which is a very interesting topic because for most of us, it directly relates to what our ancestors were doing. Eva, do you have some? You're Sephardic on one side, right, or on both sides?
We are from Hungary, both of us yeah.
You're both okay. I thought you had one Sephardic.
No.
So all of us are probably Ashkenazic. I may have one Sephardic grandparent, but he lived in Amsterdam. So what we're going to see is that life in Europe was pretty interesting beforehand. So let's look at this slideshow I'm going to show you. Let's see here. 1 second. Slideshow. There we go. From beginning. Okay. Now I'm going to go to share. So much technology, so little talent in technology. All right. So, okay. So this is Jews in, so when we think of Jews, actually I think I'm going to move this back for the thing, but when we think of Jews in pre-war Europe, this is what we often think about, and that is Tevye and Life of the Shtetl. This is obviously not Tevye because he's got 3 boys and 1 girl, and we all know Tevye had 5 girls, 5 daughters. But we think about, the small little rural settings, the kids all dressed in, almost pauper clothing that are very religious. You see it with the tefillin. We think of, sellers on the street, retailers. You think of small communities. We only have photos from a little bit of the 19th century, but not before. We think about more in poor sections because we forget that Tevye was the whole community was very poor. And this is a beautiful picture I found. Look at this kid in his eyes. Those are beautiful eyes. Shows that not all kids had brown hair, brown eyes. He obviously has probably blue eyes. We think of kids studying. We think of the poor areas with muddy roads. We think of the family all huddled together, mostly living in poverty. We think about eating together in these little chaters. And that's the last one, poor community. So this is what we think about when we think about Eastern Europe. But the truth is, before the Holocaust, life was vibrant for Jews in Europe in many ways. I mean, look at this. This looks like it could have been today, except for the hairdos. You got life living in the cities. Look at the little girl so happy holding the hands of her parents as she crosses the street. You got the little guy playing the accordion and the little girl playing, I'm not sure, maybe a sax, but the accordion, of course, is a very popular Jewish instrument. You got the girls' school. They are all wearing modern outfits, although it's not modern to us. But to them, they all have hip, modern hairstyles, probably in the 20s when this hairstyle was popular. You see weddings, but look how they're dressed. They're dressed kind of like anybody in Germany, with the gowns and the flowers and the dad wearing the tux. You've got people having a good time, so cute, having a little picnic with dad. You got the girls' gymnasium, but they're all dressed how? In shorts. These are girls in shorts and t-shirts. You got the schools that they're still studying and maybe in Jewish schools, but look, they all look like they could be at a parochial school in anywhere in Germany. You got a wedding. The bride is wearing a white wedding gown like people today might be wearing. You got a guy wearing a top hat. Look at the mustache on this guy. You know, that's a mustache. It's a curved up modern mustache. Look how cute this couple is. They're at a coffee shop reading the paper. For those of you who are under 30, the paper is something that was dropped off every day and is an actual paper with news on it where you get your hands all dirty. Look at that, having a little informal outside concert. Isn't that cute? But yet still going to synagogue. But look at it, they're all wearing top hats and this fancy hat. And the kid doesn't have payas. And he's reading Torah with looks like a very nice yad. So, and look at this. Boys or young men, a combination in shorts, playing probably what sport? What's the most popular sport in the world? Soccer. Playing in the snow. Look at that giant house in the background. It's not a little shtetl. They're all dressed like anybody. So, when we're going to look at Jews in Europe before World War II, we have to understand that it is a wide variety. You can't just say all Jews were like this in World War II before. So let's look at some numbers here, as I'm going to go back and put us back on sharing. Let's see this. There we go. So if we look at the numbers, and can you guys see this? All right, put it on the slide. There you go. So these are the numbers of Jews living in Europe and the Soviet Union in 1933. Obviously, they're estimates.
You can put that here for me too.
But you can see, by and large, Jews are living in Eastern Europe and Russia. We've got the most is, of course, in Poland, Soviet Union, and then
you gotta move all the way around.
Romania. So you see there's no Ukraine yet. And then if you come to Central Europe, you still have a very significant population, especially in Germany, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, and Austria, which is the former Austro-Hungarian Empire. So there's still a significant number of Jews there, 1.75 million. And then there's some in Great Britain and France, as you imagine, about 500,000. So we're spread all over. So you can't just say we're in one place. So you can imagine Jews in Greece and Jews in Turkey and Switzerland, and especially, of course, the Netherlands, are living different lives. And if you come here, you can see in Germany that Jews are spread all over, but a really high percentage are in Berlin, which is just like the regular population, more Jews in the bigger cities, more Jews in Berlin, and more Jews in Vienna. So we have Jews living all over in a wide range of places. So you can't spend 45 minutes talking about the Jews in every country. It's just not possible in such a short amount of time. But what we're going to talk a little bit about is lifestyles from two different perspectives. So we're going to divide the Jewish population in Europe not by country, but by perspective. When Jews started moving to Europe, Middle Ages, they're generally welcomed in because they have skills. And then over time, obviously, they become more and more isolated. In Europe, in all of Europe and Russia, you had a system in which everybody was part of the system. I've mentioned this before. You're clergy, you're wealthy, you're a landowner, you're a shipper, you're a peasant, you're a farmer. Jews were on the outside always. And in some places they were welcomed, in other places it was disastrous, in other places it was just they were ostracized. In some places they did very well, but they were always outsiders. That's why so many Jews went into, as we mentioned, money lending, because it was one of the few jobs open. So many Jews went into tax collection because non-Jews wanted Jews to do this. So many Jews went into rent collection because non-Jews wanted Jews to be the face of doing this, and thus the anger would look towards them. But even though Jews were ostracized, we have to remember it wasn't like people felt they were part of the country. They were part of a feudal society, and their place was their place for life mostly. There was exceptions. If you were very gifted or very lucky, you might move up or down in society. But by and large, you stayed where you were. And Jews were welcome some places, kicked out. They were did very well in Turkey in the Ottoman Empire. After being kicked out of Spain and Portugal, a lot of them did very well in Holland, which continued to be a very good place for Jews for a very long time. And in a lot of places, Jews were then, as their welcome wore out, were moved into walls within the city, which we call ghettos, where Jews lived in the walled areas. I'm not talking about the Holocaust ghettos yet. It's not that bad. You go into your walled city at night, and you're ostracized. But during the day, you go to work and do your thing. But your friends were fellow Jews. Other places like Holland were a lot more open. And in some places, especially in Eastern Europe, Jews were eventually gathered in the 18th century. Mainly by Catherine the Great, by others, and you were put in these small little towns, which we call shtetls. That's Fiddler on the Roof. So you have Jews living in the shtetls, you have Jews living in the ghettos, and you have Jews living in society. And that's how it really was for a good portion of Europe until the 18th century. But the late 18th century was a time of great change. We saw what happened in America, but it happened in Europe as well. What was the change in Western Europe and Central Europe? You started to see the change in the type of government and type of lifestyle, not just in the Jewish world. And you started to see this idea of democracy, self-rule, start to intrude on this feudal dictatorship system in Central and Western Europe, not in Eastern Europe, especially in places like Germany and France, which were, of course, the two of the three with England main countries, our most powerful or most progressive, wealthiest, most technologically advanced. And so in the 19th century, you saw a change. Really started in a big way with Napoleon, who welcomed people into the army, into the upper echelons, regardless of their station in life. And he started opening up society and saying, you can make progress upward. I'm going to open up universities to everyone who is qualified, not just the elite. And he went to the Jewish community and said, do, do you want to leave the shtetls and ghettos? And the Jewish community said, yes. And he, as others starting to say, well, will you say that you are a French citizen and pledge allegiance to the country? And the Jews said, wow, this is the first time we've been asked this. We would love it. And he said the same thing to other people. And they said, this is great. And this started something called nationalism, where people said, I am an English citizen. I am a French citizen. I am a German citizen. I am part of the country. And yes, you still had this upper class, lower class society in Europe that you didn't have as much in America, although we all know that happens, but it wasn't institutionalized. But now people were going to universities, we're getting different kinds of jobs, we're moving to the cities. The Industrial Revolution, for better or worse, got people moving to the cities for new jobs. And Jews were institutionally often welcome to do the same. Now, that doesn't mean there wasn't limits, or there wasn't social issues, or that there wasn't issues within certain companies or certain professions, but institutionally you started having people have rights. And it went backward and forward in the 19th century. We'd give more, they'd take back. You really saw this a lot in France and in Germany, where the rights would come and go. But through this time, Jews left the ghettos, and they went and they became part of society. And in Western and Central Europe, they were still a pretty small percentage. So although there were restrictions and anti-Semitism, it wasn't the same of what we saw in Eastern Europe. They were actually going into professions. And some of them became very wealthy and did quite well, and some of them became middle class, and the majority stayed poor, just like everybody else in Europe, in Eastern and Western and Central Europe. So you saw Jews who went into a wide variety of fields, and it was really amazing for both men and women. Now, obviously, women were not equal to men, but it went for the same for the Jewish world. Jewish women were the same class as women everywhere else. So you've got a very significant population in Western and Central Europe, and they are given citizenship, which is amazing, not just for them, but for everybody, because citizenship was a different type of thought that you really only saw in America. And a lot of people moved to the cities, and they were civil servants. And some of them became doctors and lawyers and clerks and worked in banks. A lot of them worked in factories. Some of them became teachers. Some Jews saw themselves first as Germans or French, and secondly as Jews. And even though they were banned from clubs and sometimes universities, and there was negative stereotypes in the press, they were still living in society, which was excellent. And not only that, Jews were all literate, women and men, which was very unusual because most men were still not literate yet, and very few women were, even in the upper echelon of society. But all Jews could speak. They had their own language, Yiddish, which they tried to get rid of a little bit because they wanted to speak German and French, because they wanted to be emancipated. They wanted to take this opportunity to be part of society. And some of them stayed religious and went to services, and some of them didn't. But the ones who went to services, like in America, they wanted to wear suits like other people. And maybe they're not wearing their yarmulkes outside of services. And maybe once in a while, even their kids are dating non-Jews. How crazy is that? So you even saw the Reform movement start in Germany, and the Orthodox movement start in Germany. The Reform movement, the Reformers wanted to play music on Shabbat. They didn't, maybe have a little bit more vernacular German, or maybe make the services a little shorter. It wasn't the major changes we see in America. And then they looked at the other side and saw the people who wanted to keep the tradition as they felt it was. And the Reformers said, well, you're just Orthodox, as an insult. And that word took hold. So now you see Jews who are given the opportunity to assimilate a little bit and acculturate a little bit. And it is a great opportunity, not for just Jews, but for non-Jews. And so maybe 15% stayed what we call Orthodox, and the rest of the 85% became liberal. And you had rabbis who were liberal at synagogues that were liberal. And it was really an incredible place to live in many respects. And you had places like Denmark where they had smaller numbers of Jews that were giving, generally speaking, the smaller number of Jews, the less persecution. And that goes everywhere for every society. Whoever's persecuted, the smaller that number is, the less they worry about. You think about the South with all the Jews who moved to small towns. The KKK was not after them most of the time. They had their businesses, they were good to the society. They were most of the time left alone, despite what the reputation of the South is. And so this became a real coup for Jews living in Western and Central Europe. Now, sometimes things did go a little problematic. We saw the restrictions start to increase in Germany in the 1830s and 40s. It's very funny, too ironic, that the Reform movement kind of faltered a bit in Germany, but the reason is hilariously ironic. As the German government became a little more restrictive, and rights were starting to be restricted a little bit, the Orthodox Jews went to the government and said, you see these Reform Jews, they're not really Jews. They're not following Judaism as they're supposed to. And the German government said, oh, okay, we want to be, and so they clamped down on Reform synagogues at the request of the Orthodox Jews, asking them to clamp down on the liberal Jews. It's one of those ironies. And so as the restrictions kind of got a little bit more severe, what did a lot of these Germans do? They got a taste of this assimilation, acculturation. Some of them had money. And so they left. They took their money and their business sense, especially in retail, and where did they move? America, where 250,000 Jews from Germany moved in a period of 40 years. Now, that's, in the scheme of things, 240,000 Jews is not that large. I mean, it's a large number, but it's not an incredibly large number. But what do we know already is, sorry, I'm having a problem with my PowerPoint. I have a problem. Oh, there we go. What do we know already about the Jews in Germany, which really tells us a little bit about what we're talking about? Well, if 250,000 Jews moved from Germany to America, that is a very high percentage, because let's look at the number of Jews in, sorry, this thing's blocking it. Let's move this. There we go. Move it over. There we go. Slideshow for beginning. So let's look at the number of Jews. There were 565,000 Jews in Germany in 1933. But in a 40-year span in the 19th century, 250,000 left. So if the population is 565 in 1933, it was probably less. So maybe a high percentage, 40% of the German Jews left from Eastern and Western, from the more educated or enlightened, because the parts of Germany going all the way west had the Enlightenment, and now life is good, right? So any questions about this? So this is what life is like for Jews in Western and parts of Western Europe, and parts of Central Europe. They're living in society. It's almost like being in America. Not quite as good as we have it here, but certainly the best it's been. Jews were walking in the street, having lunch at cafes, going to their job at the bank. Yes, you can join the country club, and yes, sometimes there's an uproar. We saw what happened in France in the late 19th century with the anti-Dreyfusonians and the Dreyfusonians, but it is way better than it's been in Europe ever. It's better than it's probably been anywhere up to America. Flossie.
And they came to America. Where did they come? To New York?
Mostly came to Newark, but they also spread out. New York, Baltimore, Philadelphia, the places you'd think. But then some of them spread out among the country and started setting up retail, mostly retail. They did a lot of things, but mostly when we say there were doctors, but not the percentage we see today. But a lot of them were retail, and they came to America, and they found that their skills in retail were very impressive, especially compared to smaller areas in America. So you went to small towns, you have connections everywhere else, and all of a sudden you have general stores, schmata stores that are doing very well. So the Jew store, as we know, sometimes it would turn into a furniture store or a clothing store, or as my dad and my grandfather, a toy and sporting goods store. But they all, so a high, like a ridiculously, we think of everybody in the world as a merchant, like in the Jewish world. No, the Jewish world, the percentage of merchants were off the charts. It's almost ridiculous how many Jews became merchants, because you can make a living and do well in America. And if especially you went to the smaller towns, you did not see animosity, because what you were doing, nobody else could do. You're not taking jobs from other people. You're opening a store that people do not have, and you're bringing in stuff that people don't have. They can get in catalogs, but everything from farm equipment to toys. So the resentment level in the South was a lot less than in other places. But again, the resentment level is still much lower with 250,000 Jews than with 3 million Eastern European Jews. We're going to talk about that in a second. But any questions so far, Michael?
Yeah, you mentioned something about literacy, and my question is, were they literate in Yiddish, Hebrew, and their home country language, or were they just literate pretty much in Yiddish at that point, I would think?
They were, but we're talking pre-18th century. We're talking whatever language, Yiddish. They would know Hebrew in terms of prayers and study. And
nobody spoke Hebrew.
Often they knew the language of the land. If you're invited to be part of society, you learn the language of the land. But by the 19th century, they're speaking German in Germany, and they're speaking French in France. And yes, they know Yiddish, but a lot of them are not teaching their kids Yiddish anymore. So by a certain point, Yiddish is disappearing from that part of Europe.
But they were literate in French and
Yes,
German?
absolutely.
Oh, okay.
Men and women, because it's really easy to transfer literacy. It's not easy to be literate in a second language if you're not literate in your first language. So if you speak Yiddish, moving to German is not that difficult. I mean, comparatively to somebody else who has, you need to learn to speak German for your job, and you're teaching your kids German. You're not teaching your kid Yiddish. So by the 19th century, Jews are speaking the language of the land. I mean, in Austria, you're speaking German. A lot of times, certain German, of course, is all over the place, as is French and English. But you're learning, and and even women were literate. Again, there were limitations when women were allowed to study Jewish-wise, but in terms of transferring, women became literate before men outside the Jewish world, much faster. Now, they weren't given the premier jobs, but it wasn't because they were Jewish women, it was because they were women. So let's not think that they were the heads of banks. That doesn't happen for many, many years, and it still hasn't happened in a lot of places, unfortunately. So let's look at the map again and go back to what we were talking about, those first pictures we were showing. And that is the bulk of the Jewish world, not 99%, but the largest Jewish community in the world was Poland. We all knew that if I had asked all of us, what is the largest Jewish community in Poland in Europe in 1933, we would all said Poland. That's just known. But a lot were in the Soviet Union. We're not going to talk as much about that, but there's some similar things going on there. We're going to talk about the Jews in Eastern Europe and parts of it's hard to say Czechoslovakia now. I'm so used to saying Czech Republic. So these are the areas where the Enlightenment never touched, where democracy was not coming in yet, where everything stayed. Now the Industrial Revolution starting to hit a little bit, but this is where we start to see the Jews we were talking about. This is where we see the Tevye. This is where we see Fiddle on the Roof. So as I mentioned, Jews were in shtetls and ghettos and living in society. In Eastern Europe, the vast majority were living in ghettos or shtetls. There's always small numbers of Jews who are living in cities and living in the world. A little bit more in Soviet Union than in Eastern Europe, but you did have Jews, but a very small percentage, 1 or 2 or 3%. And they were usually special. The vast number of Jews living in Eastern Europe were poor in the shtetls or in the ghettos. And this is what we see here. Now, in this world that we're seeing, some things remain constant. The most important thing is literacy. Every poor little girl and every poor little boy you see in these pictures could read. Now they're reading Yiddish or speaking some dialect of Yiddish. Some of them, they can do Hebrew for prayers and stuff. The girls can do it as well. They had their own type of literature called Chines, so I can never pronounce it correctly. But they're all dirt poor. They're the milkmen. The richest man in Tevye and Anatevka, Fiddle on the Roof is such a good example for us. Who's the richest man in Anatevka? It's Laser Wolf the Butcher, right? He's going to marry Seidel. Was it Seidel? What's Tevye's eldest daughter? Is it Seidel? I don't remember. She says, no, I don't want to marry him. I want to marry Hodel, this other guy. The richest guy in the shtetl's the butcher, who would be the poorest person we know, because it's just he's just doing little things. I mean, we all have access to books and we can go to stores and buy stuff. We are richer in every way than every single person who lived in the shtetl or ghetto. So life there revolved around the community because you were not allowed outside. In your shtetl, there were a couple people who did business outside the community, and they could speak Russian or German or whatever language was needed. But most of the people stayed in the community, and their whole lives was in their village or getting married to somebody in the next village. They were not leaving. They're getting some news. There's always a couple of people who get news from the outside. They come to the community and tell them this is the news. And obviously, if you speak and read Yiddish, you probably could speak some, read a little German. All you have to do is change the characters, but the language is very similar. So their world is revolved around being Jewish and living in this world where they are cut off completely. Now, the people who are living outside the shtetls, the non-Jews, are not more literate. They have more access to society, but they're still living in poor society as well. But it was much more desperate in these shtetls where we have all these fond memories, but it was really quite difficult lifestyle. You were poor, sometimes hungry. The community took care of everybody. Everything revolved around study and holidays and prayers. Everything revolved around keeping kosher. The most respected person in the community was the rabbi, as it should be, we all know. But it's a very different lifestyle than what we're seeing in Western and Central Europe. It is not very different than the early 20th century. It wasn't that different than the 19th century. Now, what you did see eventually coming in the city is a vibrancy of Yiddish. You start to see in some places where it was allowed Yiddish theater and Yiddish newspapers, and this happened in the end of the 19th century. You have a lot of Nobel Prize winning authors coming from the shtetl world because they're writing this beautiful prose and poetry about how difficult life is. And it really resonates with people everywhere. Isaac Bashevis Singer, I.L. Peretz, there's a lot of them. And so you see the theater, you see the newspapers, you see people trying, especially in the ghettos in the cities, not as much in the shtetls a little bit, but in the ghettos in the cities, you start seeing this more and more. So as we see, a lot of people lived in the shtetl, but a lot of people were living in the ghettos where they were close to what's going on, and they had more of a, outside view a little bit when it came to theater and that kind of stuff. But really, they were talking about two different worlds. We're talking about this world and this world. And they're not that far apart. It is a complete, now it's for all of society, but for the Jews, maybe even more so. And so what we saw with this group of people, the ones living in Eastern Europe, and we saw the numbers, 3 million in Poland, 2.2 million, that's in 1933. This is after 3 million leave and come to America over a 40-year period. So the numbers in the 19th century, where the population would have been smaller, was much larger, maybe 70% bigger in terms of numbers. So the Tsar is assassinated in 1881, and a massive pogrom system comes into place, which shifts, and we see a lot of Jews deciding to make the trek to America, which was, anybody see An American Tail? The little mice? Where there are no cats in America, and the streets are paved with cheese,
Yeah.
and that they move here, and we now know what a lucky break we have because they did make that move to America, because most of us are here because of that move. Whereas if they had not stayed and the Tsar hadn't been assassinated and things would have just remained at the difficult level and they had stayed, there would be 7 million Jews in Poland and not 3 million. And that would be a catastrophe. That would have possibly ended Judaism as we know it. So in terms of what was going on in Europe, every country had their traditions, every country had their languages, but you can really look at the Jews in this two divided system. Those who lived in the world and were part of the Enlightenment, the move to democracy, citizenship, and then those who lived in Eastern Europe who did not have access to this, although you did start in the 19th century to see Marxism in Russia and socialism, which a lot of Jews took hold of. We know that didn't go well. So you did see that in Eastern Europe, but a lot of that was in Russia, what became the Soviet Union. And so you did start to see Zionism, which took hold in Eastern Europe, much less in Western and Central Europe. Why did Zionism take a hold in Eastern Europe more than Western Europe? Life is good. I mean, yes, there's some persecution, but this is the best life's ever been, and I'm living in Berlin. Am I going to go move to Palestine, which has nothing going for it? There's no cities, there are no jobs, there's no education, there's no theater, or I'm going to stay in Berlin and be successful in my retail business, or as a lawyer, as a banker, or as a teacher. It's like in America. How many Jews in America moved to other countries? A very small percentage, because despite persecution, America is still pretty good. It's the best it's ever been for most people. So this is what life was like in Europe before World War II. Any questions or thoughts? All right, good. I answered everything. Now, what I want to talk about is I'd love to come to do something in Bluffton maybe next month, have like this teaching thing. I'm thinking like at a restaurant, and everybody can just buy their own food, or Michael can pay for everybody. Michael's going to pay. We're going to go to a really expensive steakhouse. Ruth Chris is a nice one here. I don't know if they have that in Bluffton. Do they have Ruth Chris? All right, you know what? I don't eat steak, but if Michael's paying, I'm going to order one. Just look at it and say, wow, that's nice. So what's a good place in Bluffton, like restaurant wise, where we could get 10, 15, 20 people maybe, or 5 people could sit and we could have a discussion?
How about that Chinese restaurant, 46?
I love Chinese.
Rooms.
Ron brought up Chinese. It wasn't me. Did everybody see him?
Yeah, we have a very excellent Asian restaurant on Route 46.
Do you know what the name of the restaurant is?
Homie, something like that.
I'm going to look it up right now. Restaurant Bluffton, 46th Street, right? 46th Street?
On Route
46, not 46th Street, Route 46.
My least favorite place in Bluffton is Truffles. I absolutely refuse to go there, but they do have private rooms.
That's what I just said.
Yeah, they have
Michael.
private
That's funny.
rooms.
Yeah.
All right, so we can go to Michael's least favorite room, which I actually like Truffles a lot. Obviously, I would always prefer Chinese, but we can do.
That's fine. I prefer that.
We can do Truffles. Is Truffles easier?
Truffles is good.
So what would you guys prefer?
Chinese is better.
Huh? What? What's,
Well, if we want to talk, Truffles is a more private room.
can we get the room, do you think?
Oh, yeah.
If we reserve in enough time.
Yeah.
All right, so let's do Truffles. Sorry, Michael. And you're the one who damaged yourself because I didn't hear Flossie bring it up.
Well, it's for the cause. I may have to boycott. I don't know.
You can you have a salad. How about that? You can get ice cream next door. So Truffles
right.
will call to reserve. Truffles, they have a separate room, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what I'm going to do is going to call and see if one of the dates of one of the Wednesdays in I don't know which one yet. I'll mention it later, but I'll see if which Wednesdays they have available. And so we'll do Truffles, and maybe once a month we'll go to a restaurant. Jeff.
So I do have a few non-food comments to make.
All right.
So I enjoyed your talk in terms of what you were assigned to do. For me, the things that stand out are from an immigration perspective. The question is, how did these people end up where they were? Because they didn't sprout from the ground. So the few 100,000 people that were still in Central Europe were a remnant of the folks who had been thrown out. I mean, and going before that, the even smaller number of people in Portugal and in Italy, in Spain, who were the Sephardic Jews by and large, who found themselves in those places after being thrown out of Israel or Palestine, going back a few more 100 years. There were very few there because they had been thrown out, by and large, found themselves in countries like Germany until the Catholic Church essentially threw everybody out of Italy and that part of Europe. So life was good, but there was still a fraction of the folks, because most of them found their way further east, stuck in Poland and Russia in the little bit of territory that they were permitted to live in, which is, as we know, called the Pale. They each found themselves in the usual circumstance of immigrants. And you're right, for us as Americans versus all the people trying to come here, you leave where you are for one of two reasons. Either there's a pull, which is pretty darned unusual. Our president said, well, we don't have people from Finland coming to the United States, and those are the ones we want. Well, Finland is universally the happiest country in the world, year after year after year. Why are they going to pick up and move someplace? And they don't. And by and large, that's true for Americans, or more in keeping for the history of Jews, you're pushed. And each of these folks found themselves in circumstances where they were pushed in terms of our Jewish ancestors. They were pushed from place to place. So as you said, if life looks good in Germany or Austria, you're not going to go to a swampland that's undeveloped, even if things are sort of falling apart around you. But if you're in a hovel in Poland and your choice is between dying next week because the Cossacks are coming versus a swamp might look pretty good.
Yeah, and again, every place is different. Some places welcome Jews, and over time restrictions started. Some places Jews fled, as with sometimes Jews were kicked out, as with first England, then France, and then Spain, and then Portugal. And sometimes the Jews were then welcomed back, because then Jews went back in the 17th century to England and were welcomed back and did much better there than in some other places for a very long time, even before the 19th century. So you're right. It's you know, and again, it's not a weekly game of Jews moving from place to place. It's over generations. But yes, Jews did great in Spain and Portugal for a very long time before they were kicked out. They did great in the Ottoman Empire for a very long time until the 20th century. You know, so you're right. And it has a lot to do with being different. We're always the outsider. And so it just depends on the situation. Sometimes Jews were protected by the leadership of a country, as with Denmark, which was pretty consistent, as was with Holland until the Holocaust, then Denmark even through the Holocaust. And some places like England or France, they were kicked out and came back into, well, France, they were kicked out, they came back. It was a great place for Jews in the 19th century, and then things started going wrong before the Holocaust. There were a lot of issues. So you're right, it's not one set way, and it has a lot to do with going where you can. But you know, it's always a question for us. These Jews, so many stayed in the shtetl areas, often because they weren't allowed to go other places, often because they didn't know anything else. And if we could just go back in time to the millions in the Pell settlement, where a lot of them, they were allowed to leave. They just had no, they just say leave, just make the trip. I know how difficult that would be. An amazing thing we could do.
Yeah.
But thank you very much for letting me talk a little bit. Does anybody have any topics they'd like for the next couple of weeks or months? We could go back and do some more philosophy. We haven't done that in a while. Would that be something interesting to people?
Why not?
We'll do philosophy. When we meet for lunch, we'll do something a little less esoteric. I'm going to get the date. And is there any date in February that is bad?
Towards the middle to the end is hard for me. I'm going to be away.
Okay, great.
So
Thank
the
you, Flossie.
earlier the better.
So we could do it as early as the 4th if people want. I'm out of town on the 11th. So it would be the 4th. So let's do it the 4th. How about, does that work for everybody?
Yeah. All right.
Okay.
You
What's
know,
happening,
it just dawned on me
No, would be good.
that I would check Akamaya is the name of it. And they may have a private room. I'm not sure.
What is Akamai? Is that the Chinese place?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's
I see it.
it's an Asian bistro, which is
I
excellent.
see it. I see it. I'm going to call that one first.
Yeah.
If
You
I
know-
make the call, Ron, who is the one? Ron is the one who mentioned Chinese, and I want to make Ron happy.
The,
I can
You
go either
should.
way. I can go either way, but I'm here for Ron.
the thing is with truffles, how many people are we gonna have?
I don't know, maybe 10 at the most, 5, 10.
You think you're gonna get 10? We haven't had 10 people
When they hear it's food, they'll come.
We have 10 people on right now.
Oh, okay.
We have 7 participants plus some have 2. So we have 9 people on right now. 2 are not on the screen, but they're online. So, but we may have more. And if we only have 5 or 6, we'll have only 5 or 6. I think it's great. But I think maybe more people come if we come together. Flossie.
Rabbi, looking around, I see all men have beards except Ron. I think Ron should consider a beard to join all the men here. Look at him.
Yeah, you know what it was? I used to have a mustache, but the women went so crazy over it.
That's it.
I had
That's it.
Arlene made me take it off.
Yes.
For someone in his 90s, you sure have a good memory.
Yes, you do.
Yeah.
That's right. No, Michael, he's talking about last month. All right. So thank you guys. So we'll do February maybe we'll do it the 1st of every month. We'll do a class where we come together at a restaurant, and that'll be nice because I haven't been getting out there as much as I'd like. So February 4th it is, unless, Flossie, do you have a last question before we conclude?
Yeah. Could you tell a quick about this scholar in residence that's
Great.
coming?
Thanks. I'm going to make announcements of what's coming up now. So we've got some really cool things coming up. First off, Saturday, if you're coming to service, it's Legislative Shabbat, which will say thank you. I know if you're from Bluffton, it may, I think if all of them are coming from the Georgia area. We're working with the AJC, so they're choosing it. Friday night, there people are going out to dinner who are coming to services. On the 16th, a week from Saturday, we have Rockin' Shabbat. And on the 17th, we have Sarah Dono's Bat Mitzvah, who's a great kid and really has worked hard. And I think if you don't know her, she's just terrific. So, and then the Scholar in Residence weekend is on the weekend. It's on Thursday, the 26th. That'll be at the Learning Center in Savannah. It's free. That is at 5:30. It'll be during Shabbat services. We're going to have a dinner. You can come for the we have like a pre-neg, a service, a dinner, and a program. You can come for one or all of them. And then she'll be speaking Saturday morning after she'll do a little synopsis at services, and then she'll speak at the luncheon. So those are just coming up just the next couple weeks. So it's going to be a busy week. So hopefully you guys can step in for some of the stuff. And anything else you need, just let me know. So Happy New Year. I hope you guys all had a good one. It is really good to see you guys, and looking forward to February 4th at a Chinese restaurant because Ron wanted one. Right.
I think everybody will be happy with this place. It's
right.
really very good.
Actually, I know Michael's going to be happy. I love truffle. So you guys have
Well, that's what's important.
That's right. It's what's important. Eva, did you have a question? Or we say goodbye?
Take care, everybody.
Bye
Have
all.
a good one, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.